going over the wall. There is evidence in which you had give me a video for fuck's sake.
Iseth, where are you going? We were in the middle of making a video.
No, and no. I couldn't take one more second of that nonsense. His ideas have no internal consistency whatsoever, and I'm not, no.
Iseth, do you not see where we are? In your anger, you've wandered into the deepest reaches of hell, where only the worst, most nonsensical theist YouTube videos can be found.
Philosophical and ethical implications of the absurdities, scientific...
DNA, with all the above qualities, just evolve on its own?
Atheist means atheist. They are atheist.
We need to get out of here right now.
Oh, come on, you're overreacting. There's nothing going to be worse than an exorcism video.
Atheists have a lot of arguments, but they never really think of anything new that the church hasn't had answers to for the past 2,000 years. So let's answer them.
See? Just a bunch of theistic Gen Zers nibbling on Tide Pod. Auntie? Auntie, are you okay?
No! Get it away! Get it away!
Atheists have a lot of arguments, but they never really think of anything new that the church hasn't had answers to for the past 2,000 years. So let's answer them.
You know, not to want to sound too pedantic, but it's kind of hard for an institution to offer answers for 2,000 years, especially the ones concerning the Bible, when the Bible only officially got patchworked together 500-ish years later.
But let's even grant the 2,000-year number for the sake of argument. Well, if atheists have been asking the same questions, then the church responding with the same answers would be appropriate, and the atheists would be the unoriginal ones. Alternatively, if the church keeps answering novel questions with the same answers, then the church is being unoriginal. Now, frankly, I don't think novelty is very relevant when considering either objection or answer. I'm interested in quality of objection and answer. And I've peeped your video, so spoilers, but your answers are dog shit. To be fair, some of the objections you bring up are dog shit as well, but that doesn't really look any better on you, seeing as you're the one who selected these objections. Steel manning might come off as an altruistic practice, but it's not. You steelman your opponent's position to show that not even the most charitably interpreted or robust version of what they're saying can withstand scrutiny. Now, I'm not going to say you've strawmanned anyone. I'm sure there are atheists who have raised some of the terrible objections that you're going to attempt to answer in this video. I am saying, though, that the inclusion of the terrible objections has done you no favors.
Aw, Auntie, you're so pessimistic. I bet his 2,000 years old answers are great and have aged like fine milk. No, seriously though, it is perfectly fair game to go after low-hanging fruit. I do it all the time. I mean, look at... I didn't say that. Let's just continue.
Religion causes wars.
Not agreeing, but go on.
Well, actually, only 7% of all human wars were caused by religion, and if you remove Islamic wars, that number drops down to 3%.
Okay, the first objection you present atheists as making has nothing to do with either atheism or theism. I mean, I guess it's tangentially related in the sense that there are more theistic religions than atheistic religions, but the amount of war carried out by the religious has no bearing on whether or not God exists, which is what I was expecting this to be a video about. Now, despite it not being an objection I would raise, I'd like to point out that you didn't even refute it. You presented the objection, religion causes wars, and then said, yes, it does. Now, maybe you don't think 7% of all war represents a lot of war. I'd say that's a lot of war. Now, I'm letting you just get away with that 7% number because I don't think the specifics are actually that relevant, but I do want to point out, I bet there's a bit more religion buried within that 93% than you are comfortable admitting. For instance, there's a conflict going on right now between Israel and Palestine. Would you call that a religiously motivated war? Because I could see that very easily being categorized under something else, like a war having to do with national sovereignty or borders. But to deny the undercurrent of religiosity present on one or both sides, I think might be a bit naive, or perhaps even dishonest.
No, I'm not agreeing with either of you. I'm gonna go the controversial route and say that no war has been caused by religion. Now, hear me out. Don't push the dislike button already. I have a reason for saying that. War, in pretty much all the cases, has only one of two reasons, if not both, which are power and resources. Although one could rightly argue that they are often interchangeable, since the person who has control over a particular area usually also partially, if not fully, has access to its resources. For example, if we look at Ukraine versus Russia, it's mostly about land and sea access, meaning more land and better resources, and of course a conflict of influence and control between Russia and the West. If people would say Putin wants to revive the USSR, that wouldn't strictly speaking be wrong, but nobody stops him from USSRing the parts of Russia that he already has. Nor would anyone care if he traveled to Pluto and took over its poles to USSR those. Because nobody cares about Pluto. No, the reason why people care about Ukraine is because he's trying to claim resources and control over something that others want too. Or rather, don't want to give up to him in the first place. Same with Israel and Gaza. Both sides have a very strong emotional and religious sentiment and contempt for one another. But both sides ultimately fight because they want a particular piece of land and the control over said land. And whether you find the claim of one side or the other side more appealing or more justified is absolutely irrelevant to the fact that if that land wouldn't exist or wasn't considered valuable, then there would be no conflict in the first place. So when we look at history and look at the Crusades, which is most likely what we're talking about here, the Crusades were a response to the spread of Islam, which was a threat to their control over a particular territory. Now, one could obviously make the argument that if claiming resources is thoroughly baked into one's faith, that would make a war a religious war, such as, for example, radical Islam fighting for their caliphates. But I'd be really surprised if the people in charge are all that interested in religion rather than in power. Even the 30-Year War, which basically started because Martin Luther decided to scribble a few things on the front of his church and to translate the Bible into a language that people actually could understand, that war was still ultimately a struggle of power and influence over a certain subset of the population and the resources. Don't get me wrong, religion is used for war purposes all the time. Either in the context of making excuses to keep uninvolved parties placated and away from interfering, or as a propaganda tool to tug on people's fifis and to get otherwise peaceful and indifferent masses to support a cause that they couldn't care less about under any other circumstance. And I mean, we've all heard that sort of propaganda before. We must bring democracy to the Middle East, or workers of the world unite, or let us retake the Holy Land, or most recently, do it to protect Grandma. Whether you agree or disagree with the core message that they represent is neither here nor there. What matters is that these are tools of emotional manipulation. They themselves are not the actual cause for something. And so to use them to describe a cause in the context of war, to me, seems a little bit disingenuous.
Alright, Iseth, I see you picking my nit. Well, I could pick your nit right back. And then you'd pick my nit, and then I'd pick your nit, and by the time we're done nitpicking, we'd all be picked and nitless. Now, we're only on point 1 of God knows how many in this video, so we should probably stop this tangent now. But we do need to determine who's right about this, so I challenge you to a death battle in the bog of suffering, otherwise known as the YouTube comment section. And if anyone watching has an opinion on this subject, I'd encourage them to leave their perspective in the bog of suffering as well.
A lot of evil has been done in the name of religion. This is true, but the most murderous people in human history have been atheists.
Okay, this is basically the same as the first objection you say atheists have. I really don't feel like repeating myself. Besides, that would make me unoriginal, and you claim to value originality. Though I suspect you're going to demonstrate that that's not quite so true as we go further into the video. But there's no reason to let this question go totally to waste. Now that you've opened up the doors to the discussion, there is something I'd like to talk about. That being the murderous tendencies of Hitler. Hitler did not kill 6 million Jews. Okay? That's a very common thought trap that people fall into, but given any amount of consideration, I think you'll agree that's not what happened. Hitler was the head of a state. He was the head of a military, and the military killed 6 million Jews. The military of 1940s Germany was overwhelmingly Christian.
This doesn't mean religion is true, it just means you can't use that as an argument against it.
That is true. Who killed who has no weight over what is factually correct and what isn't. However, you could argue that a healthy dose of don't take everything on faith, your faith and faith leaders included, might save you the occasional headache, regardless of what that faith is.
If you were born somewhere else, you wouldn't be a Christian. Okay, and if you were born somewhere else, you wouldn't be an atheist. Everyone's beliefs are shaped by their context.
Way to dodge the question, buddy.
That we are all shaped by our contexts is the atheist's point. Right? You think you've made a rebuttal to it by switching the words around, but by doing so, that really just indicates to me you didn't understand the reasons someone might say this. If people's beliefs are contextual, that means belief in God is not the default. It means that he has not, for instance, written knowledge of himself on each of our hearts. Various religions or denominations of religions say, in one way or another, that there are no atheists, that the people who claim to be atheists actually do believe in God, and they're just lying, either outwardly to other people or inwardly to themselves, that they're suppressing the truth in unrighteousness. I'm glad to hear that you don't think that, but there are plenty of people who do, and so this objection was not leveled at you, but them. And if you don't think this is something that many religious people say, then you're not paying attention.
That aside, atheism being right or wrong doesn't have any impact whatsoever on whether or not Christianity is true. Atheism could be the biggest hive of bollocks in the universe for all I care. It still wouldn't absolve you from answering the question. If your religion is the absolute and only truth, then why is it restricted to a particular area and a set of cultures? Why is it not everywhere? And you did not provide an answer.
How do you know which religion is true? Well, everyone, religious or not, has faith in a certain worldview. It's just that some worldviews are called religions and some are secular. But everyone has to ask the question of which worldview best explains the world.
Dude, why did you even bother including this one? You didn't even attempt to answer the question. All you did was rephrase it. You went from, how do you know what religion is true, to, how do you know what worldview best explains the world? Right? Those are functionally the same question, but you presented the latter as if it was an answer to the former.
You also completely missed the point, little Z. Again, the question is, how do you know that your religion is the correct one? As you say, there are many people and worldviews out there. They can't all be right. So why should yours be? Why should we believe that yours is the right one? Again, it doesn't matter what others believe. Either your religion is correct or it isn't. Either you know if it is correct or you don't. And if you don't know or you don't have a good reason for it, then why should anyone be listening to you? Your reply doesn't weaken the question's implication, it enhances it. Look, I don't want to tell you how to do your job, buddy, but the next time you dodge a question, try not to make the atheist's point for him. It makes you look kinda stupid.
There's no scientific proof that God exists. Well, by definition, science can only prove things inside the natural world, and by definition, God is something outside the natural world. So science can neither prove nor disprove God.
What exactly do you think a definition is? Pray tell. Because last I checked, a definition is merely a way for us to frame and describe something. It has nothing to do with actual reality. Whether we define rain as condensed water or as an interspatial transcendental pair of unicorn undies floating in plasmic jizz and peeing on our heads doesn't have any impact on the fact that we have water falling from the sky whenever it rains.
Putting aside the interesting use of the word definition, science is a tool for helping us understand the world around us, and we exist within the natural world. Now, it is through science we have actually, by quite a bit, expanded our concept of what the natural world is and what it includes. If you're saying that the natural world cannot possibly encompass God, that, to my ears, is tantamount to acknowledging we cannot know anything about God. Okay, well, if that's your position, then stop saying you know things about God. Unfalsifiability is a weakness of a claim, not a strength. I can make any claim I want about an unfalsifiable entity, and you would have exactly as much reason to take me seriously as I have to take you seriously.
There's no evidence of anything supernatural. Well, that's just not accurate. There are medically documented cases of people with demonic possession speaking in languages they don't know, for example, and people with near-death experiences getting information they never had access to.
What does supernatural mean, if not existing outside of nature? You couldn't keep your story straight from one question to the next. In the previous question, you said science had nothing to say about the supernatural. And in this question, you're saying there's scientific evidence for the supernatural. You need to pick one. Now, on to the actual substance of this point. No, we do not have compelling evidence of the supernatural. Pointing at someone speaking a language is evidence that they know the language. Not that they don't know the language and are being puppeted by a spirit. If someone has information, how did you come to the conclusion that they shouldn't have that information? How do you know they couldn't have guessed the information even if they didn't know it? And this is granting that these documented cases are describing people who actually spoke languages or actually knew things. Neither of those is necessarily true. Are we discounting dishonesty as an explanation? There are psychological and social explanations and motivations for all of these occurrences. You know what would be at least moderately more compelling? Video evidence of someone levitating or scuttling up a wall. Yeah, there are documented cases of those occurrences as well, but documented does not mean substantiated.
The Bible has contradictions. Okay, you think you found an apparent contradiction that the church hasn't known about for 2,000 years?
You mean 1500, not 2000. The Bible was at earliest patchworked together in the late 4th century, and the Roman Catholic Church wasn't officially a thing until the late 6th century. Now you can go all copium at me if you like and make up some imaginary definition of church and Bible, but if you genuinely tell me that people were aware of the contradictions in a book that didn't even exist yet, then you can't get upset if I genuinely start questioning your sanity.
Every apparent contradiction can be explained by understanding just a little bit of theology.
Jesus Christ, my guy. Why even waste the breath? Right? This was you just going, nuh-uh, and leaving it there as the totality of your thought. No one who agrees with you would be impressed by that answer, and no one who disagrees with you would feel refuted by that answer. This compels no thought or emotion from anyone but me. All you've managed to do is compel bewilderment out of me. You chose to respond to this objection, and in your response you implied that refuting the objection would be trivially easy, yet you didn't refute it. Do you not understand how that makes it look like you've got nothing? And there are explanations you could have given, like inconsistencies between passages are the result of imperfect translation into English, or the meaning of this metaphor would have been understood by the people of the time to mean something different than what we would interpret it to be. Now, do these explanations adequately cover every instance of biblical inconsistency to the point that we could say the Bible has no inconsistencies? No, clearly we couldn't do that. That's absurd. But you didn't even try.
If a manual tells you to hammer a screw into a pre-drilled hole and later pretends that there is no screw and tells you to thread a fat rope through that hole that no longer exists because you hammered a screw into it in accordance with the previous step, then that manual is dog shit, no matter how divided it pretends to be. And if then someone tells you that the inconsistencies you found don't exist as you point right at them, then you can't be blamed for thinking that that person might have a few screws loose, just like his preferred manual.
The Gospels were anonymous. Okay, anonymous doesn't mean we have no idea who wrote them. It just means the names of the authors aren't signed in the text itself. But we literally have writings from church fathers who knew the apostles and can verify that they indeed wrote the books named after them.
Am I allowed to skip this one on the grounds that not a soul gives a fuck? No one has based their atheism off of this. Nobody cares. I don't care. I'm getting tired. And I need to get out of jail free card or I'm gonna go crazy. And this is probably the least interesting question.
What he said. Yeah.
The Gospels misquote Jesus. Now, it's true that a lot of secular scholars think the Gospels are a mix of real quotes from the historical Jesus and fake quotes added by the church, but none of them can agree on which quotes are legit and which are not, so we can discard their opinions.
Religious scholars have different notions about the nature of Jesus' fundamental essence. If you consolidate the distinct people who make up your opposition into a single monolith, of course you're going to find contradictions. But that monolith doesn't represent any of those people. Your motivation for doing this is blatant. You just want to avoid having to answer any of their objections. It is obvious and pathetic.
Jesus never claimed to be God. Yes, he did. He didn't say, "I am God, worship me," but he showed that he was God in many places in all four Gospels by doing things that only God can do. It's true that he didn't walk around before his resurrection claiming to be God, because he wanted people to figure it out themselves. That's why he kept saying, "Who do you say that I am?" However, after his resurrection, people figured out that he was God, and Jesus congratulated them.
Not only did Jesus not claim to be God, but I am claiming to be God. Right now. I am God, worship me. There, I didn't even leave it ambiguous like he did. I do things that only God can do, like maintain Earth's orbit around the sun and create short stacks with no gag reflex. Truly, I am benevolent, and you believe me because I said it, and saying it is evidence that it's true. Are you fucking kidding me with this shit?
Also, if Jesus never said that he's God or anything else along those lines, then he did in fact not claim to be God. And even if I granted you that he did all of these weird godsy things and all of that stuff just for the sake of argument, then he would still not have claimed it. And saying that he did would be a lie. Let's change the example to make it a bit more clear to you. Because I know that whenever God fifis are involved, people tend to not pay attention when they only have two IQs. If you would, for some reason, be accused of stealing a cat, and you never explicitly say, "I stole the cat," or something along those lines, then it doesn't matter if people find the cat in your arms. They still can't say that you claimed it. They can say that you did it, or that you didn't explicitly deny doing it. But if they said that you claimed it, they would be lying too. Because you didn't. Just like according to your fancy book, Jesus didn't. Now, I know this might sound nitpicky, but how the hell are you supposed to argue about anything if you're that inaccurate? Pay more attention to what you say and don't be an accidental liar on top of being a crazy cat lady.
The later one of the Gospels was written, the more divine it makes Jesus seem, so we can extrapolate that Jesus was originally a human figure who got made more divine over time. Alright, maybe some Gospels emphasize Jesus' divinity more than others, but what about Paul's letters that fully confess the divinity of Jesus and were also written before any of the Gospels? So that breaks your pattern.
And the fact that the pattern doesn't hold is evidence that Jesus actually was divine, because... Guys, I'm so tired. I'm tired, and my head hurts, and I made the mistake of looking at the time into the video. We're only 30% of the way into this video. Like, we're not even at the halfway point. And I already feel like my soul is being flayed. I'm not doing the rest of this sober. I'm getting a drink.
Cheers!
Psst, psst, hey, I think you're totally onto something. There are these people who claim to have gotten signs from the spirit of Elvis long before the official prophecies came about of his return. And the people just wouldn't accept it. They wouldn't accept that the king is the long-awaited Messiah whose reappearance will signal the defeat of Satan. Can you imagine that? The goal of these infidels. Absolutely
Oh, thanks for the shot of whiskey, Auntie. Cheers!
Cheers. What were you saying to the camera?
The Bible supports slavery. No, it doesn't. Just because there's slavery in the Bible doesn't mean the Bible supports it. There are some Old Testament verses that could be interpreted as condoning slavery, but Jesus himself said that the Old Testament made accommodations to people's sinful state.
Do you even listen to yourself? The Bible doesn't condone slavery, except where it does, but that doesn't count because that was just because God had to accommodate his sinful creations. Sort of. What kind of God has to go to his creation and compromise?
Okay, guys, listen. How about we don't do slavery?
You want slave? Okay. Well, how about we do slavery a little less? No. Okay. Oh, maybe in a few centuries. Can we do less in a few centuries? How about that? Maybe. Okay. That's great. Thank you. I'll be back in a few centuries then. Yeah. Awesome. Bye. Is that really what you think of your God? Is that really the way you want to portray him to us? I mean, I'm not complaining. I'm just surprised.
And also, slave owners in the American South had slave Bibles for their slaves to read, but it omitted a lot of the real Bible, so if the Bible actually did support slavery, this wouldn't have been necessary.
The Bible does condone slavery. Not just person-to-person slavery, which would be bad enough, but cosmic slavery. We are God's slaves. I don't even think that's apt. We are God's playthings. We are his toys. He made us from nothing for his amusement. And if we don't obey him, we get the whip. But the whip doesn't compel obedience. No, the threat of the whip compels obedience. But by the time you actually get the whip, you just get the whip forever. Until the end of time. It's not punishment for a reason, not punishment to convince you to act right. No, it's just punishment for the sake of punishment. The Bible endorses way worse moral lessons than slavery.
And also, slave owners in the American South had slave Bibles for their slaves to read, but it omitted a lot of the real Bible, so if the Bible actually did support slavery, this wouldn't have been necessary.
Doesn't the fact that they gave the Bible to slaves in the first place make your funny bone tinkle? At least a bit? I mean, yeah, sure, they did remove the parts where the slaves weren't 100% obedient, but there is clearly a theme of obedience and submission going on throughout the entire book. I mean, let's be real here. If you wanted to raise a bunch of communists, you might end up blackening out a couple of lines in Karl Marx's writings, but you never ever would even think about giving them a Milton Friedman book.
Christianity supported slavery. Well, sure, some Christians did, but all human civilizations have had slavery. Christian civilization was the first one to abolish it on moral grounds. The fact that you're against slavery is due to Christian influence. Also, most organizations fighting modern-day slavery are Christian.
Christian bad thing? Christian bad thing because everyone bad thing. Christian good thing? Yes, Christian good thing because Christian good. You good thing? You good thing because Christian good thing.
What slavery exactly are we talking about, by the way? The very narrow chattel slavery of North America, or slavery as a whole? Because ancient Athens prohibited debt slavery 500 BC, as did ancient Romans at some point. And then in the 3rd century BC, the Indian emperor prohibited slave trade, and around 900 BC, the emperor of China prohibited slavery altogether. None of these cases were for economic reasons, mind you, so don't give me this only Christian morality nonsense. In fact, since we're at it, do you know what actually ended the old-style slavery in the west of Europe? It was the collapse of the Roman Empire. And slavery didn't just completely vanish, it got turned into serfdom, a state in which you were still basically a slave, but at the very least you were traded with the patch of land that you lived on, and not just like a piece of carpet just like that. And that kind of slavery eventually fell out of fashion too in the by then predominantly Christian Europe. However, unfortunately for you, Christianity wasn't the actual reason for that one either. The Black Plague was. And the predominantly Orthodox Christian Eastern Europeans didn't care about the plague all that much because they kept that garbage well into the 19th century. Very Christian of them. Of course, you also have forced labor camps, where you either use criminals or proclaim people you don't like as criminals and force them to work for you. Those were and still are around in many, many places, Christians and otherwise. In fact, if I don't remember wrongly, Colorado only removed the forced labor exception for inmates in 2018, Utah and Nebraska in 2020, Oregon and Vermont in 2022, and some states didn't remove them at all. Not quite as Christian as you advertised it either, buddy. But maybe Christian organizations being against slavery is a more potent argument. Something with a bit more, bit more substance. So let's look at an easy one then. In most Western countries, predominantly Christian, of course, you have a huge number of predominantly Christian girls, often minors, being dragged and trafficked for, let's say, forced adult purposes. I have seen the attempts and partially the effects firsthand in my youth. And things have only gotten worse since then. It seems a very clear-cut case to me, and yet I don't recall any of these Christian countries doing all that much about it, or all that many Christian organizations being vocal and standing up to these issues. Some of the more potent ones, in fact, actively denounce the people who are desperately trying to highlight the problem in the first place. And I mean, I don't blame you for not knowing what is going on beyond the US, although I'm pretty sure there is some of this going on in the US too, because you're just a little Gen Zer and these things aren't really highlighted on TikTok or anything. But just because you are unaware of these things, that doesn't mean that they don't happen. And you can't expect me to take your superior Christian morality garbage seriously if to this day the Christians around the world are morally so deficient that they actively ignore the plight of their own kids.
God killed tons of people in the Bible. Well, it's actually way more than that. God numbers everyone's days. He's the giver of life, so he can take it, especially if people sin.
Weren't you just done telling us Christianity is against slavery? And yet here you are telling us that your great amazing God owns our lives like we're a bunch of, slaves. And that he kills us off willy-nilly based on his preferences or whenever we've served our purpose. How the hell can you hold these two conflicting ideas in your head at the same time and not have your brain explode?
It's actually way more than that, because after he's done killing them, he then throws most of them into an eternal pit of fire and pain. Now let's say only the evil people get sent there, the people whom we would want separate from us in heaven. Well, God knows exactly how to rehabilitate them, but chooses not to. He also knows, and has the capacity to, put them in a different dimension, where everything is great and they experience eternal bliss separate from everyone else who's in heaven. But he doesn't do that either. Both of those options are equally as strenuous on God as damning someone to hell is, in the sense that every action is equally strenuous on God, because nothing is strenuous on God, because he's omnipotent and can do literally anything with no effort. Yet he still chooses to inflict suffering. He's evil. The God of the Bible is evil.
Atheist countries are more prosperous. Yes, it's true that Northern European countries are very prosperous and very secular, but correlation doesn't equal causation. It's not like atheism causes prosperity, it's that prosperity causes atheism because when people have comfortable lives, they don't feel a need to depend on God.
In other words, there is an incentive for God, or rather the godly institutions, to keep us all poor and miserable because that makes us believe in him and therefore maintains a need for them? Interesting.
But why are these particular countries so prosperous in the first place? They may be secular now, but they're rooted in generations and generations of Protestant Christianity.
First you say correlation doesn't equal causation when talking about the present secularism, and then you turn around 180 and use the correlation that these countries were at some point Protestant and proclaim that is the causation. Absolutely amazing.
If you want an example of a country that's atheist and not rooted in Christianity, look at communist China.
Why doesn't communism, or more generally, centrally planned economies, produce good results? Some of it is a matter of efficiency. It's easier for a bunch of decentralized firms to each solve small math problems, rather than a single large centralized firm solve a ginormous math problem. But more important than the inefficiency, in my opinion, is a discrepancy in what is being valued by both the central planners and the citizens. Both the government and its citizens might care that the citizens eat, but the government cares a lot less about that than the citizens do. The relative values these two groups have on whether or not the citizens eat are not in alignment. And that's even granting that the government wants the citizens to eat. Sometimes they don't. Now, the central planners need to provide at least some value to the citizens in order to keep the state stable and remain in power. How are they going to do that if their processes are inefficient and their values misaligned? They do that by reducing the varied ends individuals have down to the common ends of the state. They indoctrinate. They supplant individual identity with group identity. They make you dependent on the state, such that the state's flourishing is directly tied to your own flourishing. You have value because the state gives you value. Does that messaging sound at all familiar to you? Am I saying that theism is as bad as communism? No, I wouldn't say that. No one's as bad as communism. Please, don't get mad at me. I love you. But what I am saying is both communism and theism are memes that hijack people's brains via the same pathways. They latch on to irrationalities present in everyone, and they twist them to their own ends. You have brain rot. It's different in degree, but not different in kind.
There's 4,000 gods that people believe in, and you're atheist to 3,999 of them. I just go one god further. Okay, this isn't the gotcha that you think it is, because the question of whether some sort of god exists is fundamentally different from the question of which religion is right about God.
Why do you believe in Yahweh as opposed to Allah or Zeus? You aren't a deist advocating for unadorned theism. You ascribe specific characteristics to your god. And whatever system of thought you employed to filter out the other religions can be employed to filter out yours. This is because your religion isn't special. Like you agreed to earlier, you're the product of your context. Is this an argument against the existence of any gods at all? No, it's actually not even an argument, period. It's the atheist describing something about themselves. However, the point of bringing it up is to draw into question whether or not you have good reasons to believe in your God. You see, there aren't many deists proposing unadorned theism, and even the ones that do don't really have any social influence. But Christianity does, and that's the context in which atheists bring up arguments against Christianity, at least here in the West.
Imagine you have 10 teenagers coming to you telling you that there was a robbery. But for some reason, every one of them has a completely different description of the robber. Some say there were 2 people, some say there were 5, some say there were 3, some say there was 1. One of them says that the robber was Asian, another one that the robbers were white, another one that they were black. And somehow, not a single one of them knows who was robbed exactly. What would you think in such a situation? Is one telling the truth and the others aren't? Is the fact that all of them say a robbery happened reason enough for you to believe that a robbery did in fact happen? How would you know? The funny thing is that most Christians act exactly like the atheists you argue against, as long as the dilemma posed to them is not about Christianity.
If God created everything, then who created God? Well, God is defined as the uncaused causer.
Uncaused causer, you say? So if God can be a causer that is uncaused, then clearly there is stuff around that doesn't need a causer. By your own definition.
Everyone knows there needs to be a first cause at the beginning of the chain of all events in the universe.
Dude, you just said that God is defined as the uncaused causer. So uncaused things clearly can exist according to your own standard. If he didn't need a cause, why would anything else need a cause? And if he causes everything, then either he would have to cause himself because he would be something, or he would be nothing. And these are not my ideas, mind you. These are yours. I am merely applying them consistently.
Everyone knows there needs to be a first cause at the beginning of the chain of all events in the universe, and it makes a lot more sense for that first cause to be a personal God who caused things for a reason, rather than some random impersonal force.
No, not everyone knows that. In fact, I'm saying no one knows that, because even if they believe it and have a high degree of confidence in that belief, they aren't justified in having that belief. So they think they know it. I'm saying they don't know it. To my mind, a first uncaused cause is equally coherent as the universe being a product of multiple convergent uncaused causes, or a universe existing causelessly that has never not existed. Things appear to have causes from our perspective, and our perspective is within the universe. We don't know whether or not this perspective holds when applied to the universe itself, and we don't know if it holds when applied to whatever state reality was in prior to the universe. If prior to the universe is even a coherent thought, we don't know yet. That's how little insight we have into this matter. All observable minds seem to be the product of physics and chemistry, things that we would call impersonal forces. You're assuming that these impersonal forces were caused by a mind that was itself not the product of prior impersonal forces, but you seem to just be saying that because you want to, because it makes you feel good. That's not convincing.
Science disproves God. Well, actually, the church invented modern science.
You know that both of these claims can be right at the same time, right? The church can invent science, which then can disprove God, and thereby the truth of the church's claims. Just saying.
All the founders of the scientific revolution deeply believed in God, and medieval theologians laid the groundwork for modern science by saying the world was governed by an intelligent creator.
No. The origin of modern science was scholasticism, which is based on the works of Aristotle, who, last I checked, was from ancient Greece. That guy was, of course, a polytheist, so clearly the reason science is so successful is because there are more than one god, and the father of gods has a soft spot for cheating on his wife.
That means we can understand the world with our intelligence, and studying God led to studying the world because the world is God's creation.
You've given the actual answer to this question earlier when you said the method of science cannot be used to answer the question of God because God is outside of the universe. Right? You posited that God is unfalsifiable. That's why science can't disprove God. Your new answer is a non sequitur and an appeal to authority, one that could be used equally well to defend alchemy. Now, much like belief in alchemy, belief in God has declined amongst members of the scientific community as time has gone on, and we've developed more scientific understandings of how the universe works. Now, this doesn't matter a lick to me. I don't care about the opinions of the scientific community on matters that aren't scientific, but you seem to. So do you not see how this cuts against your own position? I don't know if you've realized how often you've been arguing against yourself throughout the course of this video, but it's been quite often, and that makes the most sense to me if you really didn't understand any of the arguments you were making. That these were just things you had heard other people say, and now you're parroting them without any thought for how they mesh together.
God is just used to fill in the gaps of things that science can't explain yet.
Move aside, Z. Listen, Atheist Rookie, have you paid no attention at all? What is this stupid God in the gaps argument nonsense that you're coming up with? God is not in the gaps, he's in their brains. Everywhere in there. If they stub their toe, it's God protected me from falling and breaking a leg. If their phone dies because it's out of battery, God is giving me a sign. If they're losing a dear friend, God needed him in paradise. If they catch the goodies, God wants me to be a priest.
Iseth, cooties don't exist.
Oh, right. Where were we?
Well, actually, God is the reason for everything, even things that science can explain. It's not one or the other. It's not like everything's explained by either science or God, and the more science can explain, the less God can explain. Really, science can explain almost everything, but God is still behind it all, because science explains the how, and God explains the why.
Okay, so the gap is why, or whether or not there is a why, and you're filling it with God. So the objection stands. In most cases, I would say how and why are the same question, especially in regards to scientific phenomena. If I go outside and it's raining, and I ask, how does it rain, versus why does it rain, I'm asking the same question. I'm asking for an explanation for the rain. The only context in which why is a different question from how is when it pertains to motivation. If we ask how you killed someone versus why you killed someone, one is asking about the mechanics, and one is asking about the intention. So yes, I know you posit intentionality behind the mechanics of the universe. That's the basis of the disagreement. Bringing it up to me doesn't answer any objections, it's just stating your position. Now, if we go back to the atheist's objection, we have famous examples of people doing precisely that. Yeah, tide goes in, tide goes out, you can't explain that. That's God of the gaps. You've used God of the gaps. Unavoidably so. You've said both there are documented supernatural events, yet also that science can explain everything. Well, then science can explain the supernatural. And the things you call supernatural aren't supernatural, they're just natural things that have yet to be explained scientifically. And then you'll stop calling them supernatural once you have the scientific explanation for them.
If God is good, why can't he destroy all evil?
Because he's a useless stick?
Well, he eventually will.
Yeah, copium.
Okay, if evil can be destroyed, then you're positing that evil is a thing. Well, why did God create the thing, then? Why did he make evil? That's the problem of evil, that there's evil at all in the creation of an all-good, all-powerful, all-knowing God. It shouldn't need to be destroyed, because it shouldn't be.
Why can't he do it now? Because he'd have to destroy you.
The fuck of an excuse is that? He'll destroy what he wants to destroy anyway. He has already established what he destroys or not. All he does is sit there and waiting for, not even sure what for. Maybe his last compromise back and forth that he had with his creation was so traumatizing to him that he still has to recover, or something, or maybe he's just lazy. You know, sitting at home on his couch, playing Duck Hunt on his retro LCD TV or something.
Okay, one, I'm pretty sure you think he's going to do that to me anyway because I'm going to hell. But two, can he really not destroy evil without destroying me? Could he not rehabilitate me or destroy only the evil parts of me? We're talking about an all-powerful, all-knowing being, right? You're putting some very arbitrary limits on what he can do.
Why does God let any bad things happen? Because we deserve it. Because we deserve it. Because we deserve it.
Holy shit! That's some major Stockholm Syndrome stuff going on there, buddy. No, the baby dying of cancer does not deserve it. The gazelle being mauled by a lion does not deserve it. And the hundreds of people being tortured with over an hour of religious cringe right now don't... No, wait, those guys actually do deserve it. They like it. They're masochists. Did you know? However, pets being abused or abandoned by their owners don't deserve it either. And if you seriously think that you deserve being barbecued for eternity, if you don't grovel for mercy to a creature you've never ever seen in your life, then that is some cultist garbage you were indoctrinated into that you do not deserve either.
Because we deserve it.
This is a confusing answer. Because presumably what you're saying is we deserve it because we had done bad things. But the question is, why did God let bad things happen? Like, why did he let us do bad things? Or maybe more precisely, why did he set up the universe in such a way that he knew we would do bad things? If we deserve it, it's because he predestined us to deserve it. That's a lot like saying that domino deserved to fall because I knocked it over. I guess you could say that, but ultimately, I'm responsible for knocking over the domino. So if you'd like a rephrasing of the question, fine. Why did God want us to deserve it? Does he have a reason more noble than sadism?
Well, animals don't sin, so why do they suffer? Well, the Bible says all things will be restored, so if God is good, we can assume that they will be compensated.
Animals will be compensated? Are you telling me that animals have souls? Or that they're going to be restored to life and be put in eternal paradise after God's plan has been enacted? I have never heard theology like this, and I find that very weird but interesting.
Oh, don't you worry about the fact that the poor dear got eaten alive by a bear. Oh, I'm sure he'll get the biggest participation trophy in deer heaven for having been such a good little snack. Sarcasm aside, how exactly do animals get compensated? For example, if I smash a God-fearing mosquito, will it go to heaven? Will it eat people in heaven? And I mean, mosquitoes lay about 200 eggs. These eggs then hatch within a couple of days. The larvae turn into pupae after less than a week. Those pupae then mature, and in another few days, you have a new mosquito. So you basically end up with 200 new mosquito souls every second week in the warm seasons. And that year after year, decade after decade, century after century, millennia after millennia. Have you really thought that sort of theology through, buddy? Because that's an awful lot of mosquitoes. And that's just mosquitoes.
How do you know that God isn't evil instead? Well, because evil is not a thing the way good is. Just like cold is just a lack of heat, and dark is just a lack of light, evil is just a lack of good.
And reality is the lack of God. Exactly. I'm glad we settled that.
And for good to be objective, it needs to come from God. So a God who is objectively evil is logically impossible.
Okay, earlier you said God was going to destroy evil. Right? Implicit within that answer is the notion that evil is a thing that can be destroyed. Otherwise, you were saying God is going to destroy nothing. You do not maintain consistency between your answers, and it's very annoying.
Evil is just a lack of good, and for good to be objective, it needs to come from God.
I'm not sure how to reply to this, to be honest. I mean, it's Fifi-style word salad picked up on a Tumblr blog somewhere. There's the obvious sort of reply that on a human level, heat is a sensory input and cold is a sensory input, so they're basically all just inputs. Or if we go to absolute zero, then heat is energy in motion form and cold is energy in form of mass. So there's no absence of anything there either. And likewise, I could say, yes, light is not just a bright something, it's a set of waves that your eyeballs can actually see. And if you can't see light, but it's warm and you hear noises, then there are still waves around you, just that you personally cannot see them, and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, that's just useless sciencey nitpick. It has nothing to do with the core problem. Because the core issue is that little z uses an arbitrary definition for good and bad that happens to be advantageous to his cause, but is also utterly unusable in anything approaching real life. If good is defined as whatever God finds fancy, and bad as whatever God doesn't find fancy, and there is no way whatsoever to establish whether that good even exists, then there is also no way whatsoever to accurately establish what he fancies. Again, it's fifi stuff. There is no logic in this. None.
But whatever. The question is, how do we know God isn't a being that lacks goodness? Your answer is, God can't lack goodness because objective goodness can only come from God, and that answer is wrong. And now I get to go on everyone's favorite tangent, is morality objective, and what does that mean? I often find discussions over the objectivity or subjectivity of morality frustrating, because it really seems like both debaters think they're talking about a singular concept, that being morality, that they are trying to determine a characteristic of, its objectivity or subjectivity. And from my perspective, that's just not what's happening most of the time. What's actually happening are two sides fighting over linguistic real estate. Because first and foremost, morality is a word, and we ascribe definitions to words arbitrarily. Like, we come up with ideas and encapsulate them within bundles of sounds and symbols that we call words. The acceptance or rejection of a definition is done subjectively, but whether or not something conforms to that definition is objective. It's a fact. So when you tell me God is required for objective morality, what you're telling me is you define morality as that which conforms with the set of rules proposed by God. And yes, that is objective. It is equally objective to me defining morality as that which conforms to the set of rules proposed by Anti-Sleeper. Now perhaps you would object to this, saying, no, my rules are not objective, they're subjective, because what my rules are have been informed by my values, and my values are subjective, whereas God's values are not. They're objective or transcendent. And I would respond with, well, my rules might be informed by my subjective values, but whether or not an action conforms to those rules is objective. It is either the case that they do or don't, and there is a truth value associated with that, independent of anyone's opinion of it. Additionally, even if God exists, he's a subject, and his rules are an outcropping of his values because he values things. Morality based on God's rules is equally objective to morality based on my rules. You can have objective morality without God. Now, for the sake of argument, let's just throw all that out. Let's say good and evil are transcendent in a way that cannot be adequately encapsulated by words, and the morality of an action is independent of anyone's valuations of that action. Okay, why do I care about good and evil then? Let's say God informed me that it's objectively good to mutilate baby genitals. Is that a reason for me to go around mutilating baby genitals? No, because I don't value that. That abhors and disgusts me. Maybe God offers me rewards if I act morally and punishments if I don't act morally, but whether or not I ultimately act morally is dependent on my valuations of the rewards and punishments. We're at consequentialism and we're not moving from it. So, now that I've gotten through that very long spiel, let me rephrase the original question. how do we know that God isn't in opposition to human values? And the answer is, he is. As humans, that's what's relevant to our evaluation of him.
Can God make a rock he can't lift? Well, you're just asking if God can contradict himself, like can God lie, or can God change, or can God make another God? And the answer to all those things is no.
Oh, come on. Now you're just being mean. Look, I know the dude is not real, so he obviously can't get offended, but with all the effort that his authors put in to establish that the God character is superb at contradicting and lying, having you claim that he can't do it is just such an insult to the authors.
God being all-powerful means he can do anything to things outside himself. It doesn't mean that he can do anything to himself.
Nothing to himself? Like, not even a bath? Gross.
God being all-powerful means he can do anything to things outside himself. It doesn't mean that he can do anything to himself or that he can contradict himself.
Right, I don't care about this objection, but there's a single aspect of the answer that I want to hone in on. God can't change? Change seems to be a necessarily entangled aspect of acting. Like, if at some point you're not doing something, and at another point you are doing something, change has occurred. If God cannot change, that seems synonymous with God cannot act. Contrary to you saying God can do anything to things outside of himself, if he can't change, he can't do anything at all.
Why did God let evil exist at all? So he could be glorified in defeating it.
Mommy, look, I destroyed the evil sand monster that I built in the first place. I smashed it all that. Are you proud of me? Are you proud of me? Are you proud of me?
I mean, clearly there is a reason why responsible and mature are not attributes that Christians assign to their God.
Triumph over evil is a greater good than evil having just never existed.
Have you ever played a video game? Right. Imagine playing a video game with cheats enabled, and then when you win, jacking yourself off. That's what you described God as doing with the creation of the universe. Like, I could not think of a way to make God come off as a more pathetic entity if I tried, and you did so accidentally while thinking you were glorifying him.
Religion is just wishful thinking. Well, if that were true, then the Bible wouldn't be all about how much we all suck.
Yeah, but it's not just about how much we all suck, is it? Because the other side of that coin is we are the beloved creations of the most powerful entity it is possible to conceive of. It's wishful thinking because it puts forth the notion that we're important to the universe. We're not important to the universe. We're important to ourselves, and we're important to one another. And frankly, that's what's relevant to me when I think of what's important. It's the things I consider important. I don't need the universe to consider me important, but you do. You wish to be important on a universal scale, and you're not. That's wishful thinking.
Psychology explains why you believe in God. So what? If God is real, we should expect there to be some psychological or social benefit to believing in him.
That makes as much sense as saying we should expect people who believe in God to experience negative psychological and social consequences because they're fallen and depraved beings who deserve all those consequences, yet by enduring those hardships they demonstrate their devotion to God and they'll be ultimately compensated in the afterlife. Which I think is also what you believe.
Spiritual experiences can be explained by brain chemicals. Well, romantic experiences can also be explained by brain chemicals, but that doesn't mean your wife isn't real.
No. What it means is that there is a layer to the story that is subjective and not based on evidence. If you live with a partner, then your partner is physically there. It's objectively true. However, how you feel about that partner is subjective and often very arbitrary. For example, if you happen to be exposed to a hormone that makes you feel super good and super awesome, you will think that the relationship is great. Whereas if you happen to be exposed to a hormone that makes you depressed and angry and upset at everything, then chances are high that you will get upset at your partner too and think the relationship is horrible. And while your subjective perspective can have an impact on reality, in this example how you act within the relationship and thus the state of your relationship, it itself is not reality, nor does it accurately represent reality.
So spiritual experiences being explained by brain chemicals doesn't mean that God isn't real.
Yeah, and they also don't mean he is real. You have established that your God is unfalsifiable. This is the double-edged nature of unfalsifiability, is we don't have reason to ascribe events that occur to him.
Well, drug trips show that spiritual experiences are from the brain. Well, people who have had both drug trips and near-death experiences say that they're completely different categories of feeling.
Wait. Different category of feelings? How? Where is the line exactly? Seeing green kangaroos when on shrooms is fake, but when you see them having a heart attack, it's real? What if you are at the brink of death while on shrooms? Which one is it then? This is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, you could describe different kinds of drug trips as being different categories of experiences. Just because something is a different category of experience does not mean it is supernatural. The experience of a drug is different from the experience of the brain being in medical distress. Okay? Thanks. Helpful.
The story of Jesus was copied from the story of Horus or some other ancient character. Okay, dude, that's a Reddit atheist-level myth. Even atheist scholars know that that's silly.
But is it true? Because whether or not something is silly to you has no impact on whether or not it is accurate. It's kind of like those situations where people ridicule you for telling them not to shove spoons of nutmeg spice into their mouths, and then an hour later you come back and you watch them being afraid of the power plug all of a sudden, and you sit back and think to yourself, yeah, fucking told you so. You didn't actually say anything wrong, it just was funny to them and therefore they didn't pay attention. And likewise in this case, the question just happens to be absolutely funny and stupid to you, but you don't actually disprove it. In fact, you didn't even attempt to. And that obviously begs the question, can you even disprove it?
Okay, how about the tropes present within the Jesus myth can be found within other mythologies because there's commonality in the narrative elements that humans find compelling in stories? My guess would be you call me YouTube tier and then not address the point.
Faith is the opposite of logic and reason. No, it's not. Faith just means trust.
I hate to break it to you, but trust is also not defined as logic and reason. You can base your trust on logical conclusions, in which case the trust is no longer based on faith, but on logic, but that doesn't change either the definition of trust or that of faith.
Anytime you eat food, you're having faith that it's not poisoned, even if you can't scientifically prove it.
Are you kidding me? Have you ever in your life looked at an ingredients list? Half of the stuff on there needs a warning label just for pronouncing it, never mind ingesting it. No, I don't trust on faith that there's nothing toxic in my food, my dear Z. In fact, I usually assume that there is some kind of crap in there. And then I turn the product around, check the labels, realize that I was right, and after a moment of inner conflict, I decide to buy the bloody slob anyway.
If you're married, you have faith that your wife loves you, even if you can't scientifically prove that. And if you tried to scientifically prove it, she'd probably get very mad at you because it would mean you didn't trust her.
I mean, if you start to show up with one of those weird, spit probes, yeah, your wife would probably not be happy. But if you pay attention to her behavior, like, for example, maybe she brings you surprises, maybe she tries to take days off at the same time you have off so that you can spend time together. Maybe she fixes the torn pocket hole in your favorite jacket. Maybe she cooks your favorite food a lot. If you see these kind of things, and based on those things, you come to the conclusion that she does in fact love you, then I doubt that she would be all that upset about it.
Faith is belief in the absence of good reason. Now, contrary to what you say, I do have good reason to believe my food isn't poisoned, because I can consider the motivations of the people who package and sell me my food. They want my money, and they don't want the publicity of having been the people who poisoned a guy for no reason. So they have every reason not to poison me, and lo and behold, they don't. Now imagine if instead of getting my food from a grocery store, a man just walked up to me in the street and handed me a pie, unsolicited and for no money. I'm not eating the fucking pie because I don't trust that food, because now I don't know the motivations of the people involved. Also, if you don't have any reasons to trust your wife, you shouldn't trust your wife. Like, at some point in the past, you didn't know her, and you didn't trust her. Then she gave you reasons to trust her, and then you trusted her and married her. Presumably, that's the order of events. If you just start off trusting people who don't give you reasons to trust them, you're gonna end up catfished and married to some Russian dude.
Evolution proves God didn't create the world. Well, not necessarily. God often works through natural processes in the Bible, and for all of church history, there have been prominent Christian theologians who have had a more metaphorical interpretation of Genesis, even well over 1,000 years before Darwin existed.
Okay, the actual answer is evolution doesn't pertain to the creation of the world, so the objection doesn't make any sense. But you thought it made sense, which speaks not very highly of you. But examining your actual answer, how is it that you can determine what passages within the Bible should or shouldn't be considered metaphorical? Because when these stories were first propagated, people thought the supernatural aspects were literally true. That was their notion of what creation was. And it wasn't until later down the line when people thought that might be bullshit that they were reinterpreted as being metaphorical.
Christianity only spread because of military conquest. Well, eventually they did do military conquest, but for the first 300 years of Christianity, it was illegal, and it took over the Roman Empire despite that.
I noticed that the map you showed says 117 AD. However, that was not the time in which Christianity spread all that much. It instead spread during the 3rd and 4th century, especially because of the Emperor Constantine. And funnily enough, the period in which it spreads coincides with the period of decline and eventual collapse of the Western Roman Empire. It is nearly as if importing a foreign ideology and forcing the indigenous population to adopt it causes social instability. Who would have thought? It is also very intriguing to see how willing and dedicated an ideologically conquered group of people is to defend the superiority of their conquerors. Pathetic, but intriguing.
Constantine invented what we now know of as Christianity. Again, Reddit atheist level myth. Atheists can do better than that. Listen to an actual scholar.
Okay, I don't agree with the objection, and were it true, it wouldn't have anything to do with atheism, so it fails as an objection anyway. But you're not even bothering to identify the authorities you're implying you're appealing to. Like, imagine if for all of these I just said, go read a book. That would make my job a lot easier, actually. Huh. I'm gonna try that out for the next one.
If Christianity is true, why are there so many denominations of it? Well, yeah, there are a lot of denominations, but the things they agree on are a lot more significant than the things they disagree on.
Okay, that's a Tumblr tier Christian take, and had you read any books on the subject, you would know that that's not true. Holy shit, that was way easier than actually responding to you. This was an option the whole time? Oh my god, I should have been doing this for years. Maybe I'd actually produce content.
There's no evidence for Jesus outside the Bible.
I mean, there's no evidence for Jesus inside the Bible either. Merely the assertion that he existed. But go on.
Well, that's not true. There's the ancient Jewish historian Josephus who wrote about Jesus, and he's one of the reasons why even secular scholars know Jesus historically existed.
Okay, that's a Tumblr tier Christian take, and had you read any books on the subject, you would know that that's not true. Guys, get this. I just copy-pasted my audio from the previous response because I also didn't care to respond to this point. This has opened up a whole new world of response videos for me. I'm going to produce so much content. This is going to be so great for my analytics. I'm going to become so popular.
You really think God made billions of galaxies with billions of stars in each of them just to have a personal relationship with you? Yes.
And that's not wishful thinking, because the Bible is just about how much we suck. You end on another contradiction because of fucking course you would.
I'm so sorry, Aunt. I'm so sorry. I'll never drag you down here ever again, I promise.